Chapter 3. Brian stood against the wall of the Red Lady, a cup of something strong and pungent in his hand. He looked down at the brown liquid and took another drink. It made him cough, and he looked at it again. It was cheap, nothing like his father's orange brandy. He laughed briefly to himself, thinking that he wouldn't be able to afford his father's orange brandy, even if they sold it. He took another drink. Most of the people here wouldn't be able to afford orange brandy, he muttered to himself as he shook his head. Wonder how that feels, to be able to afford endless cups of brandy. Brian took another drink, draining the cup's contents. He had enough coin for 4 more cups. He thought of his father again. The only good thing you ever made is brandy, Brian said. He felt lightheaded. This alcohol, whatever it was cheap but strong. Including me, eh, father? Who are you talking to, sweetie? The voice took Brian by surprise. He looked up to see a young woman, blonde hair, pulled into a bun, blue dress hanging suggestively off her shoulders. She was pretty, prettier than most of the whores. Myself, Brian said. Why don't you talk to me? She asked. I need another drink. Brian looked to the bar. Whores as pretty as this one were too expensive. Maybe if he had seen her first, but 3 drinks in, he wouldn't have enough coin. He moved away from the wall, but the woman put a hand on his chest, gently pushing him back against the rough stone. She was slight and slender and shouldn't have been able to push him back, but he was drunk and she was stronger than she looked. Let me get it for you, she said. When she smiled, her red-painted lips revealed teeth that weren't nearly as yellow as most whores. You paying? Brian asked warily. I'm not about to give you a copper penny and then watch you walk out that door with it. A copper penny? She questioned, and then laughed lightly. My love, I don't want or need to steal your copper penny. Then she shrugged. I'll buy this one and I'll get something decent. She winked at Brian as she walked away. Girls back home are prettier, Brian muttered as the woman spoke with the bartender, who handed her 2 cups. But girls back home were reluctant to open their legs. Why? Brian had asked one girl. Because, she had said, the Creator saves that for marriage. To hell with the Creator, Brian had replied. I don't want to get pregnant, another one had said. Then there was his father. You sheep-brained idiot! Brent Eliodam had yelled at Brian when he caught him lying with a girl behind the barn one day. You'll end up like me, stuck with your mother, 5 daughters, and you, a lazy, womanizing, good-for-nothing. The girl had run away by that point, embarrassed and crying. Brian had just stood there, with his pants down around his ankles, and stared at his father as he berated him. His mother could be a nag. His sisters were pains in the arse. But what had he done apart from work hard for his father? What had he done to deserve this, when all he wanted was to be with a girl? Here, the woman said. Brian shook his head, snapping out of his daze, and took the pewter cup she handed him. The liquid was clear, and when he put it to his nose, it smelled sweet. The good stuff, she said, looking up at Brian over the rim of her cup. Brian took a sip and coughed and blinked. His head instantly felt lighter than before. This is the good stuff, he said, through a few more short coughs. The woman put her hand on Brian's chest again. She said. You're so muscular and strong. Do you work in the lumber yards? Brian shook his head. Oh, you must be an adventurer then, heading into the wilds of the West. When Brian shook his head again, she raised an eyebrow and pursed her lips, looking irritated. Are you going to make me interrogate you all night? Brian smiled. Farmer, he said. I'm a farmer. At least I was. That explains it, she replied. From where? The north. And farming got so droll, so boring, the woman said, stepping closer to Brian, that you came to Waterton for more excitement. I'm going to be rich, Brian said, with a hint of slur. I'm going to be famous. Aren't we all, the woman said. You can't do that as a farmer. I suppose not, she agreed. So you plan on making that wealth here, in Waterton, at the edge of Halthgolf then? Brian shook his head. In the east. Ah, the woman said knowingly. She stepped even closer now, pressing her breasts into his chest as she lifted her head and smelled his neck. "In the east, the wine flows like a river, and the grass is made of gold," she said quietly. "Any place away from my father is fine by me," Brian said, feeling his face grow hot as the woman pressed herself harder into him. "Interesting," she said, stepping back a little. "I have the same sentiments about my father. Loud, drunk, angry, abusive. Sounds like your father and my father could be friends," Brian said, and she laughed. He looked down at the woman, and as she took a sip of her drink, she stared up at him, never taking her eyes off him. "Look, I appreciate the drink, but I can't afford—" The woman pressed a finger to Brian's lips. "I'm not looking to make money tonight," she said seductively, and she actually sounded like she meant it, and not like some bad-acting whore. "Then what is this about? I'm just looking to have some fun," she said with a smile, as she stepped in closer again. Brian could now feel her other hand playing with the tie in his pants. "You look like a guy that wants to have some fun." I like having fun," Brian stammered as he felt the woman reach into his pants. What's your name?" "What do you want my name to be?" she asked, a growing smile on her face. Brian couldn't think. It might have been the drink, it might have been her hand, but he couldn't think. What did he want to call her? He let his head fall back, and he closed his eyes for a moment as her fingers worked their magic. Then, the name slipped from his mouth. "Kuka." "Very well," she said as she kissed his neck. "My name is Kuka. Kuka will take care of you. Kuka will make you feel good." "Good. Bad," Brian muttered, eyes closed and speaking to no one in particular. "I just don't want to feel." Like piercing arrows, the rays of the early sun shot through the window of a room toward the rear of the Red Lady. As Brian lay next to the woman he called Kuka, he watched her body rise and fall with each sleeping breath. A haze of morning smoke leaked underneath the door and floated along the floor of the room. She had done as she promised and made him feel good as she took away the memories that pained him. He dared to run his hand along her shoulder and feel her smooth skin one more time. He worried the calluses would wake her, scratch her, but she didn't move save for her breathing. "Damned farm," Brian muttered. She had said something that made him think, even as they lay together, about her father. "Are you so different from me?" Brian now wondered. "You drink, I drink. You whore, I pay whores. Your father was a drunken bastard, and so was mine." For a moment, Brian envisioned a life with this woman, a home, children, a place to grow food. Was this how married people felt? How they acted? He shook his head. "Fool," he muttered. He wanted a life of fame and fortune, a life as drastically different from his father's as possible. What a stupid thing to think. He turned onto his back and stared at the ceiling, the sunlight picking out the dust that floated in the air, mixing with the rising smoke. "You're just a whore," Brian said, "and I'm just an idiot running away from home." Before leaving the room, he looked back at the sleeping woman, his Kuka. "Will you remember me?" Brian asked quietly. Then he scoffed. Would he even remember her? "Why do I care?" he said to himself as he closed the door behind him.